Good evening. Welcome to American Government POL 101 online course. So today we're going to discuss where I left you. Last class we talked about civil liberties and civil rights. This class we're going to focus on media and public opinion. Okay, I'm going to do both the segments of the week together in one video. So you could divide that and watch it at your convenience. Okay, let's start with public opinion. What is public opinion? Public opinion is, we all have individual opinions, right? So if I ask you, do you believe in gun control or you believe in the right to bear arms? That's your individual opinion. Or in any other issue you could take. How about climate change? Do you believe climate change or you think it's a hoax? It's an individual opinion of you. Collectively, when we sum up the individual opinions of everyone in this country, that's the American public opinion. And now I will tell you how to measure that and where public opinion comes from, all those details in this lecture. The first one we start is public opinion sources. Where does it come from? How do you get an opinion on a particular issue, right? Have you ever thought about it, right? So now let's start with the first one in that. People say self-interest. Write it down. The first point of sources of public opinion is self-interest. What is self-interest? Self-interest is economic interest they're talking about. So if the government or a candidate running for office is saying that they're going to cut tax, then if you are rich and then you wanted to save a lot of money on taxes, usually the tax cuts goes to the very wealthy in this country, and then you might think, okay, that person is going to have an opinion favoring tax cuts because it benefits him, right? But it's not necessarily true, because there are very wealthy billionaires in this country who actually would pay taxes, more than fair amount of taxes, because they believe those taxes what it is used for by the government. And there are people who are, on the other hand, people who are poor who might benefit from the taxes to the rich, and those could be used for the programs for the federal government, which they are the beneficiaries, but they would actually vote against tax increase. So people could vote against their self-interest. A good example of the rich man who would like to have higher taxes for wealthier people is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett famously said, like, it's absurd that I have to pay lesser percentage of tax than my personal secretary. So public opinion is not necessarily predicted exactly by self-interest. Self-interest is one of the variables that could predict a public opinion, but it is not necessarily the right, correct one to trust on. Okay, now what else we could see? There's something called political affiliation. Political affiliation actually could get you a correct response of where an individual's opinion and collectively, I'll give you an example, then you would understand what I'm talking about. Say, for example, if you're a Democrat, then you are more high chances of gun control. If you're a conservative, there's a high chances of you are in support of Second Amendment right to bear arms. And if you're a liberal, environmental policies, you will be more prone to protect our environment and reduce climate change. So individual political party, if you know that, you could predict exactly how the public opinion of those group of people, individual opinions and the group of people. The third factor, which is important for source of public opinion, is demographics. Demographics is, demo means people, graphics, statistics, numbers about them. So demographics could include race, gender, and race, gender, and age, for example. Those are three good examples. I'll give you examples on it, then you would understand what I'm talking about. For example, if you ask, we got to legalize marijuana, and do you think people who are boomers, older, would support that, or people who are millennials, younger, would support that in higher percentage. That's right. Millennials would support it, and that's what polling numbers show. Millennials would support that way more than boomers to legalize marijuana. Say, how about if you take in gender? Let's ask this question in polling. How about killing terrorists using drone programs? Who do you think supports it more, male or females? Yes, almost 20% difference in poll numbers. Males support using drone to kill terrorists than women in the United States. Right? So similarly, the third variable, what's that? Age, gender, race. Race, if I ask, do you feel safe with police officers' conduct? And white people tend to feel more comfortable around police officers than black people. They feel safer. That's a higher percentage of blacks feel afraid of police. So that shows that public opinion could be predicted using demographics. Okay, so now we talked about sources of public opinion, which is demographics, party, right? And also we talked about in the beginning self-interest. And the next one is war. War can change public opinion dramatically. I'll give you a couple of examples. When World War II was happening, Britain was begging America to come and help them. FDR felt he couldn't help Churchill. Why? Because Americans were in an isolationistic mood. They felt this war is not our war. It's an European war. We have no dog in this fight. So they didn't want to help Great Britain. So FDR felt pressured from both sides. But that public opinion overnight changed. You know what happened? That's right, Pearl Harbor attack. When Pearl Harbor attack happened, overnight the country united behind government to fight the war. They even called it a good war. Similarly, the second example is 9/11. Yes, President Bush, W. Bush, was the president, and during his presidency, he won very in a struggle, big struggle with Supreme Court ordering the vote count in Florida. And so there was not much huge support for him in the country, in the public opinion. However, when 9/11 happened, 90% of Americans got behind the president and supported his invasion of Afghanistan to avenge the terrorists. Now you might ask, how does that change public opinion in overnight? Well, when we are divided as Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals inside the home. But when an external enemy comes and attacks us, that completely changes. We unite. We unite behind our government and public opinion changes. That's right. So war is a big factor in uniting public opinion in favor of the government usually. The next one is elite influence. The last one, fifth one, for sources of public opinion. Elite. When I'm talking about elite, I'm not talking about the rich or intellectual elite in a way. I'm talking about media elite. Okay? Media elite. Say, for example, Vietnam War. In the beginning, the public didn't oppose Vietnam War. There was a support for Vietnam War. The government was waging it, but the support started dwindling only after the media started attacking the government policies, and the media support started going down, and then eventually American public who follows the elite, media elite. So in modern times will be from the right, it'll be like Tucker Carlson, from the left Anderson Cooper, all these political commentators, pundits, and their opinions matter because people learn from that and change their public opinion. Okay? So now let's talk about how the public opinion is measured, measuring public opinion. I'm sorry it's very loud here because it's park and there are a lot of children playing, and please bear with me. So how do we measure public opinion? Well, I'm going to give you a story. Stories are the best way to understand, right? One of the interesting stories is from 1936. FDR, President FDR, was running for office, and there was a man who is running against him, Alfred Landon. He was a governor of Kansas, and he's running against him. So before the election, they want to predict who is going to win this election. So there was a magazine called Literary Digest. So they wanted to predict it very well. So they did a massive campaign to collect data and show through polling that who wins it by how much percentage. So what Literary Digest did is sent out mailing to people. They collected phone numbers, telephone directory, phone numbers, and also the mailing list of their people, readers. So they sent it out. About 10 million they went on to collect, but only 2.5 million people responded back with their voting preference. So what did they find? They found Alfred Landon is going to win the election by 57%. Only 43% votes are going to go to FDR. So, okay, let's see what happens. The election results came. FDR won by 19% higher. That's right. That error was 19%. FDR won by a landslide victory. And this is the biggest error in polling in history. 19%. What happened? Whereas while this story is going on, there is a Gallup poll. This is named after the family Gallup, and is still there, which became famous at the time. Only measured 50,000 people, and predicted correctly FDR is going to win the election, and FDR won the election. How did Gallup, which only polled 50,000 people, predicted it correctly, while this magazine, 10 million it tried to collect, at least it got 2.5 million and got it completely wrong? Well, that's what is called error in polling. There are two types of error they did. One is sampling error. That is, you have to get the right sample. So if I am eating a pizza, okay, I don't need to eat the entire pizza pie to know whether it is tasty or not, right? If I eat a slice, I know that how tasty it is or not. You could tell your verdict by eating it, one slice, correct? Similarly, because that slice is the representation of the entire pie. Whereas, if you're selecting people wrongly, which doesn't represent the entire group. So say this is entire group of Americans, and I measure this slice. If this sample is a representation of the entire group, then perfect. With this, I could predict how the country is going to go. But if my sample, this shaded region is sample, doesn't represent the rest of the country, then the polling is going to be wrong. That's called wrong sample. So I asked this, let's leave politics, I'll ask you this question. I read this interesting study in a book. Applebees, right? And when they're around the country, there's a chain, for those who don't know. When they're about to introduce food, a new product, where do you think they introduce it and test it, whether it'll be a good one, whether it will succeed, before they introduce it throughout the country? They have to choose a state. They choose a state to introduce it and check. And if it gets a success there in that state, they know the rest of America will like it. Guess where? Some of you have told me in in-person classes, Texas. Some have said, oh, New York City. Definitely not. New York City is definitely not the representation of the rest of America. You know where? Ohio. Ohio is where they introduce it. Why? Because Ohio represents for Applebees products a representation, good representation sample of the rest of the pie. Okay? And if the product succeeds there, then they will introduce it throughout the country. If not, they will take it out of the menu and they won't introduce it into the part of the country. So the selection bias was the error in FDR's election by the Literary Digest. The second error is response bias. Write it down, the errors. Response bias. Response bias is They sent out 10,000 mails and they got a response back 2.5 million. So that's only 25% response. Many people who did not respond would like to vote for FDR but didn't want to respond. What if that is maybe Alfred Landon's people who prefer that candidate responded more? That's why it's a big error. I didn't tell you how the selection bias was wrong in that, right? The two types of error: selection error, sample size error, and the response error. The first one error happened because the Literary Digest magazine is actually for middle class and upper middle class. So their readers are not the ones who usually love FDR. Right? It didn't have the poor people in that who tend to vote as well. And they selected other group of people to poll from telephones. In 1936, having telephone is a luxury. It's a big luxury. So you're again taking polls from rich people, which will not be a representation of the rest of America. So that's how, because of these two errors, they got a 19% wrong completely. They got the wrong candidate is going to win the presidency. So now you understand. So in modern times also, you could get wrong by sample selection, wrong sample selection. For example, if I want to collect data on polling, if I call only landlines, what do you think the response will be? You think that's a perfect sample of the rest of the country? No, because millennials usually don't use land phones in general. Older Americans usually have landlines. So it'll be a response of older adults than younger people. So it'll be a selection bias. It's a wrong sample size, right? Wrong sample size. It doesn't represent the rest of the pie. Okay. So now we're going to talk about different types of polling jargon, so you understand what they are, and it's fascinating. I'll tell you stories as well. So write it down as in the measuring public opinion, push poll, push poll. What is push poll? Push poll is not something you would think like, oh, it's just they're calling to see who you're interested in voting. It's actually a negative propaganda. It's a negative way of disseminating information. I'll give you an example, then you understand. Always examples are better. South Carolina, there was a primary election between George W. Bush and his other Republican primary rival, John McCain. They both are running, okay? And John McCain is doing well in the polls. He's leading the polls compared to George W. Bush. Then an individual group of pollers did the push poll, even though some people say it's Bush campaign did it, but they denied it. Let's see what they did. They called the voters and asked, is it okay for you or not if John McCain have an illegitimate child with a black woman? And what does that mean? They are disseminating a negative information about John McCain, that one, he has an possible illegitimate child outside wedlock. Second, they are saying that it was with a black woman. John McCain, in reality, happened to have a Bangladeshi child, adopted child, and it was with John McCain in campaign trails. So because of that, voters, some of them thought that John McCain really had an illegitimate child with a black woman. So it is stirring racial tensions, especially the voters who are worried about this. They voted, and the result came, even though in the beginning John McCain was high in the poll, after this push polls, Bush won the election in South Carolina. That's right. So push polls is a negative campaigning, pretending to be measuring opinion. Okay. The next one is, let's talk about framing effects. Framing, how you frame an issue matters. How you frame an issue. Let's give an example and then you will understand. When President Obamacare, he came out with Obamacare, there was a provision that women with contraceptive pills have to be covered. Whereas even in private colleges, if they are giving insurance, women's contraception must be covered was the issue. But there were Catholic institutions, some of them, who don't believe in contraception, did not want to support that aspect of the bill. Now what happened? What happened? This was a battle. Let's see how the left and the right framed this issue. The left framed this issue as war on women's rights, reproductive rights. The right framed this issue as liberals' war against religious rights of Catholic people. So now, because of this fight, that both of them framed it in a way that their people, their voters, their group of supporters will able to digest and support the issue. Next one is called Boomerang Effect. Boomerang Effect. You know, the boomerang they throw and it comes back to you. Boomerang Effect is that when there is a candidate, say candidate A, doing very well in the election, and poll numbers shows fantastic compared to candidate B, many of candidate A voters might not go out to vote for candidate A because they think, anyway, my candidate is going to win. And guess what? The candidate B might end up winning. Or even candidate A might not do as expected in the polls. That's the boomerang effect. So this could happen in some elections when the poll numbers of one candidate is much higher in support than the other. Another one is underdog effect. Underdog effect happens when candidate A is doing well, candidate B is doing not so well, but looks to other voters as some underdog. The perception is underdogs work hard and it is about fairness. People feel like the underdogs work hard and they still have to do well. So they ended up voting for an underdog candidate because of the issue of fairness. Okay, let me give you an example, then you will understand. Your book doesn't give examples of this. In the issue of Israel, okay, when Israel was shown as a tiny, when issue of Gaza and Israel is shown, right? We know how it turns out. Let me come back to this in a different way. Israel, when it's shown as with Gaza, Israel looks big, so people support Gaza a little more than if the Israel was shown along with other Arab countries in the map. Because with other countries, Israel looks then the more people will support Israel. So what does that show? When the size of some country or an individual candidate looks smaller compared to the other, then the underdog effect kicks in and they will start supporting the underdog effect. Okay, underdog. Let's talk about, it's funny, all the kids come here because I'm talking to the camera. They wanted to talk to me. I'm saying don't stop me because the camera is on. Oh man. Benchmark polls. Benchmark polls. What's benchmark polls? Benchmark polls is candidates, when they start their race, they measure exactly where they are right now at the polls. Okay, so why do they need it? So when you have the measurement, and then you could see whether after campaigning for 2-3 months your numbers raise or fall, and so then you could adjust your tactics based on that. Okay, how well you're doing. So Obama, when he started with Hillary Clinton in the primary, he wasn't doing as well as Hillary Clinton, but over the time of campaign his poll numbers shifted. So you could see, if you don't have a benchmark where you started, you don't know whether you grew or not, right? That's why it's called benchmark polls. Exit polls, write it down. exit. Exit polls are done by, it could be media or by small organizations during exiting of voters. That is when voters come out of the polling booth, they ask them, who do you vote? Who did you vote? And these numbers could be used to predict the winner before even the results come out, actual results come out. So these are exit polls. Okay, now let's talk about what are the, I think we talked about push poll, we talked about response bias, sample bias, or selection bias, bandwagon effect, boomerang effect, underdog effect, and okay, let's talk about how voters are discouraged in political participation. What factors? So there are three ways that voters might not be able to come out and participate in the voting process. The first one is alienation. Alienation, like aliens, ALIENATION. Alienation happens when people, a particular group of people, feel they are alienated. Like how? For immigrants, for example, if they feel like they don't need to vote because they don't feel they have a say in this election and they are not part of the society, or their voices are not going to make a difference. Any of these feelings, still scholars are researching on different reasons why people feel alienated. And one of my doctoral dissertation was on freedom of speech, comparing Canada and the US to a minority group called Sri Lankan Tamils. And I found that Tamils here in the US compared to Canada feel less able to express controversial political issues. So they feel alienated. If they feel alienated, they will not come out to vote. They don't feel like they're part of this functioning democracy. The next one is institutional barrier. So I told you three, right? Alienation, institutional barrier, complacency. Okay? Write down institutional barrier. Institutional barriers are barriers to vote. This happened, say, 1964. African American, Alabama, trying to go and vote. You know what they will ask them? To pass literacy test. The white voters walking there along with him to go and vote are not asked to do that. Only black voters were asked to do a literacy test. And it's not an easy test. It's a very, very hard test to make sure the people who take it don't pass, so that they could be marginalized from voting, taking away their political power. So they institutional barrier, a good example is of a literacy test, which was later got rid of through law. Now, complacency could happen to people who feel everything is going well. I don't need to go out and vote. Oh, does it remind you of you or someone you know? You might think, oh, nothing is going to change. Everything is going well for me and I don't need to go out and vote. And that is why sometimes politicians say this is an important election. It's going to determine your life. Vote like your life is on the line. All these things are to say that people come out to vote, because if people don't come out to vote, it doesn't show the representation of America has spoken. It's only the small group of people who make the government run through their voting. So these are the important ones for today's discussion. So I think I've talked enough about public opinion, and make sure you read the book and answer the questions which will be asked at the end of this, when I post this video. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss media. Let's discuss media. Media. When you think of media, what comes to your mind? Yeah, if you're a millennial, probably thinking of internet, right? Yeah, internet is slowly taking over the huge chunk of the media pie. But in old times, let's go all the way to when the country was formed, right? When the country was formed and Constitution was written and George Washington was president, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams. At the time, the only powerful media was newspapers. There was a lot of newspapers. And newspapers grew dramatically over the 20, 30 years. When 5th, 6th president came, there were way more newspapers than during George Washington time. So the newspapers is the way politicians used it effectively to communicate their ideas to the people. Let me give you an example. How many of you, well, we studied in the very first class Federalist Papers, right? Federalist Papers written by Hamilton, John Jay, right? All these three guys, when they wrote their paper, James Madison is the third one, all these three, when they wrote the paper, articles supporting the Constitution, they didn't go out in a TV and spoke about that. They wrote articles in newspapers that was published, and people read those articles. They read those articles, pamphlets, some of them were passed around. So it's a print media is what was effective and passing on the information which is powerful for people's ideas. Government ideas were passed on through print media. Then by the 19th century, when Lincoln was waging civil war, 1860 to 65, you know what came? Telegraph. That's right. Telegraphic lines. Listen to this. You know Sherman, General Sherman, Sherman. Let me spell it for you. So, General Sherman statue is there. If you go to the Apple store, the big one near Central Park. And Sherman, when he was campaigning marching to Atlanta, he burned everything which was standing, everything including houses. Only the chimneys were standing, only the chimneys. And he completely took the train tracks and twisted them so that the Southerners cannot use it, right? These were called Sherman ties. So throughout his marching area, you could see only two things standing. The chimneys, because they were made of bricks, so they didn't burn. The other one was telegraph lines. The telegraph line was to completely keep in touch and connection with Washington. Lincoln was hearing everything which was going on through Sherman's army. So communication to the commander-in-chief, right? Technology changed, not newspaper. Because when newspaper was there, the fastest thing to go was a horse. That was the thing for 2,000 plus years. Same thing, right, in newspapers. And then, boom, changed. And all of a sudden, now you have a telegraph which is communicating information so fast. Okay, let's see what happens when further decades rolled out, how politicians used media effectively. And that was FDR. FDR used radio. When radio came, his chats, C-H-A-T-S, chats were called fireside chats. If you read historians' books, they talk about how FDR, after his dinner, will be wheeled. He was disabled, so he will be wheeled into his study where he will be sitting alone and in front of a microphone, and he will be talking as if there are people sitting there and listening to him, but there's nobody. He's just so animated using his hands and communicating his ideas to the microphone, which is telecasted to the radios. People around the country tuned into the radio to listen to the president's information through the fireside chat. And people felt in their homes that the information he spoke was as if spoken sitting next to them. Not even now, modern times, the percentage of Americans which FDR had listening whenever he spoke. This is during the time of Depression, Big Depression, and World War II, right? Now, modern presidents don't get that much percentage of Americans listening to their speeches. But still, media changed. Television came, right? The first televised debate, you know what was the first televised debate? Presidential debate. That was JFK versus Richard Nixon. JFK was a Democratic candidate, and The conservative candidate is Vice President Richard Nixon running for the president. Now, look at this difference, what happened. It's a fascinating story. The story is that Richard Nixon was campaigning all day, even though he knows there's a televised debate in the evening. And he came exhausted, tired, came into the studio. They asked him, would you like to have makeup? And he said, no. And so he was also wearing a tan suit. A lot of Californians wear tan suit. He's from California. So he was wearing a tan suit. Kennedy, on the other hand, didn't campaign that day. He suspended his campaign for that particular day and rested well, got a good tan, lying in the pool side in the hotel, and came in with a dark suit and got a makeup done and stood near the podium and spoke. Nixon, whenever the camera went to him, whenever Kennedy was speaking, Nixon looked at Kennedy like this. You got to watch those YouTube videos are there of their debate. And Nixon was sweating profusely, and here around this, he didn't look like a president. Kennedy looked like a president. Even though, listen to this one, people who listened to the debate in the radio thought Nixon won, whereas people who watched the debate in television thought Kennedy won. Kennedy's own vice presidential nominee, Lyndon Baines Johnson, listened to the debate in radio because he was on his car, listened to the debate in the radio, and he thought Nixon won. But people who saw the debate on television decided Kennedy won. And guess what? That was a race, very razor-thin margin. The president was elected. Out of millions of votes, about 100,000 votes, Kennedy won the election by 100,000 votes. So television made Kennedy a president, you could say. The media, power of the media, how to use it, right? And JFK used it effectively. Now, modern times, internet changed everything. Most of us get our information, especially younger generation, get the information from internet. More and more print media is dying, as some people say. And now look at the current president, Donald J. Trump. He uses Twitter. And some don't want him to use Twitter all the time, but he argues that he could directly communicate to the public instead of going through the medium of newspapers and reporters and other things. He feels his idea gets diluted. If he goes directly to the people, his ideas doesn't get diluted, and he could do that effectively through Twitter. So in the future, we don't know what other medias will come, that presidents and congressmen will be effectively using it to their advantage and getting their message along to the people. Well, everything is about public opinion, right? Lincoln one time said, if you have public opinion, everything is possible. Without public opinion, nothing is possible. Paraphrasing his words. So public opinion is vital, and to shape it, you have to use the media effectively. Okay, let's see how media shapes. Okay, let's see. Do you think media is biased? That's a question, right? And some people would say, yeah, media is biased. Biased towards what? Right or the left? Because if you take Fox, it's biased towards right. If you take MSNBC or other medias, CNN, they're more left-leaning, right? So overall, is the media biased? It's an interesting counterintuitive answer. It's not, according to scholars. The media is not. Even though reporters are biased, biased is not the word, or when they were asked, reporters, would you consider yourself to be a liberal / moderate? Then what's the percentage? 85% say they are. That means only 15% reporters consider themselves as conservatives. Whereas in the general public, liberal or moderate is only about 60%, whereas among reporters, 85%. But does that mean then media is biased towards the left? Not necessarily. The second point, write it down. Profits. Media is run through profits. Profits determine the media. If there is, how do they get profits? Well, this was a congressman who was asking Facebook Mark Zuckerberg this question: how do you make the money in this? And Mark Zuckerberg looked at like through advertisement, right? And through advertisement, media has to make money. And advertisement comes to, say you have a television studio, right? And a channel. And I would like to advertise my hats in your thing. Why would I advertise if you don't have enough viewers? Enough viewers, more you have audiences, then I will be able to advertise in your television, correct? So the next time, think about profits. It doesn't matter right or left. Yes, they have a political agenda, but more important is that they get the profits. That's important for them. So it's a business. Media is a business. Third one, point to remember is drama. Drama. That's right. I'll summarize this in one quote. What bleeds, leads. What bleeds, like blood, bleeds, leads, L-E-A-D-S. If you have violence, car chase of a criminal, or anything dramatic, then people will watch. When I say dramatic, and people will be like a movie, like a story, any story has a villain. Good story has a villain, a hero, and a beginning, middle, and end. So media portrays stories completely as it's a dramatic story. Any real story, they try to make it so that audience could be hooked. You heard of this word, hooked to it, and watches it so that they keep watching it without changing the channel. That way, they could get more audience numbers and then more advertisement money. And next one, fourth point, media, sex scandals. Yes, sex scandals get a lot of viewers. Why? See, remember what I said about what bleeds leads? That's violence, right? Violence makes you focus. Sex scandals also makes you focus. These are our primal instincts are hit with this medias. So violence and sex, Hollywood does, so does media. Change those things so that you are hooked and watches it. I do this in classroom. Still, I'll do it in the video. I ask students, please raise your hand if you know who Monica Lewinsky is. Every class I've asked this question. I'll have at least out of a class of 30, 40. Well, these are younger generation who are still not able to remember what happened in the 1990s. At least I'll get like 8 or 10 hands, despite that this happened. For those who don't know who Monica Lewinsky is, she had a sex scandal with President Bill Clinton, and people know her. Now I ask this, please raise your hand if you know who this person is. Okay, John G. Roberts. Guess how many people raise hands? Maybe once in a while. Most of the class is quiet. You know who John G. Roberts is? He's the Supreme Court Chief Justice. That's right. There's only one Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he affects our lives in every way you could possibly imagine by the rulings. But people know Monica Lewinsky more than John G. Roberts. I'm not blaming individuals. I'm blaming, well, I shouldn't say I'm blaming. I'm saying it's a response because our media focuses on Monica Lewinsky issue because it's about sex scandal. So we immediately we watch. People who are normally not watching TV, oh, what's going on? Whereas John G. Roberts is like, he's just sat there during the Senate trial of Donald J. Trump, How many people know? They don't watch, they see him, he's on TV all day, but most people don't even know his name. So that's why, so media caters, you could say, to what we will watch. And so it's or vice versa. Now let's talk about how government shapes media. How does government shape media? Does it really shape media? Yeah. I'll give you the first point. There are like 3 points in it. Write it down. The first point is First Amendment right. That's right. Media has the right. Freedom of press. That's right. It's in the Constitution, in the First Amendment. So if I'm a reporter, I'm writing bad things about you, you could sue me, technically. But it's hard to win the case against me. You know why? Because, I have taught this to you in the class. Libel cases, if I write bad things about you, 3 things have to be proven, right? That it's false, it's harmful, and malicious intent. So it's a steep climb. And government protects media's freedom of press through First Amendment. The second one, well, you might think, oh, duh, many countries don't have it. In Putin's Russia, you can't just say things bad about Putin. And many authoritarian countries, you will be killed for saying bad things about the leadership. You think in North Korea you could say anything? No, not at all. There's no First Amendment right. Okay. So the second one is regulatory broadcasting. Regulatory broadcasting. So FCC, write it down, FCC, Federal Communications Commission. This Federal Communications Commission in 1949, yeah, a few years after World War II, created a doctrine called Fairness Doctrine. What is Fairness Doctrine? Fairness Doctrine is that if a particular media, if I have a TV channel, if I focus on one view, say left-leaning view, then if I focused on an issue for 10 minutes on left-leaning, then I have to give the opposite view, conservative view on that as well. That's the Fairness Doctrine by law. But that was repealed. That Fairness Doctrine was repealed in 1983. So media could focus exclusively on the left or exclusively on the right. And it changed. It changed the way American politics is, or media is running politics, I would say. And the third one is how government, we are talking about how government protects media, right? Shapes media. Third one is government protects competition. Competition, right? And what do you mean competition? So you don't have monopoly. Competition improves quality. It benefits the consumer always. So government protects competition and make sure it doesn't become monopoly. The media doesn't become a monopoly. Monopoly is not good for the consumer. We have talked about this and you know. Okay. Now we're going to talk about how media shapes politics. How media shapes politics. Now, the first point, how media shapes. So far, we were talking about how government shapes media. Now, how media shapes politics. First one is media. Whatever media, let me give you this. It reinforces our existing belief. We watch Fox News if we are a conservative. We watch CNN if we are left-leaning. So our political views, the media confirms. Even in Facebook, if your friend posts something that's acceptable or more in line with your view, what do? You share and you say, look, but if a friend pastes something which is opposite to your view, you think you're going to be like, oh my God, this is logically argued. I changed my opinion. I now believe in what my friend believes. You might argue against it, or you won't even want to read it fully. You consume the media, either it's internet, TV, radio, already based on your preconceived notion of ideas. So the media is shaping politics. Second one is political agenda. Media, all of this, radios, newspapers have political agenda. Even in newspapers, New York Times writes left. Wall Street Journal, more conservative leaning, right? Do you know which one has a higher circulation? Wall Street Journal. Do you know in TV which has a more number of viewership? Fox. It's conservative media, right? So political agenda is how media is shaping politics. In fact, some would even say Roger Ailes built Fox News, and it gave a huge boost to the conservative views and arguments. And now Fox News is has the highest viewership. Okay, third one, priming the public. Priming, P-R-I-M-I-N-G, priming the public. What is priming? Okay, priming the public, it's undertones, that racial undertones. I'll give you racial undertones. What the media focuses on, a particular issue, will prime you to focus on that issue. So even in advertisements, when Bush Sr. ran for office, he ran an ad that Willie Horton ad. If you're on YouTube, you are going to be, and then you could type it Willie Horton ad. It's about an African American case, Willie Horton ad. Look at it, how that using race to prime people's fears and the issues they need to focus. And then fourth one, framing the issue. Framing, right? Framing an issue is how media frames a particular issue. So if you're in a class, I would show it easily. If in a class, my class is both men and women sitting in the class. If I keep my camera and take a photo, just focusing on men in the classroom, and I take a photo and put it Professor Hillkrishnan's class, it'll look like, oh, Professor Hillkrishnan's class has all men. And if I take a photo of just women in a particular angle in a room, it'll look like I have more of my students are women. But the fact is, the entire classroom has to be shown. So they frame it in a way that fits their political agenda, and that helps them continue their viewership increase. Okay, so now today we talked about both media and public opinion. Watch this video. This is for this entire week, and I will be asking you questions on both of them to test whether you have watched this video fully. And the questions is a part of a participation grade as you do in the in-class participation. Thank you very much. Until next class, good luck.